Okay. Well, good morning, and on behalf of the National Park Service and all of the volunteers who work here at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, welcome today to our nation's capital, to the National Mall, and a very special welcome to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. My name's Alan McCabe. I'm a Park Service volunteer. I've been honored over the last 12 years to have almost 7,000 hours here as a volunteer. It's a labor of love for myself and all of the volunteers that wear the yellow hats to work at this wonderful memorial. My talk lasts about 20-25 minutes. I'll cover all the questions that people often ask about this memorial. But my goal today is really to try to give you some insight into the history and the symbolism of this memorial, and maybe give you an understanding of how I believe this memorial has changed America and changed the way America treats her veterans. At the end of the talk, I'll answer any other questions you have. There's also other volunteers down at the wall today, and they're available as well to answer questions or to help you find a name on the wall. This memorial is one of the most visited memorials in Washington. We get about 4.5 million visitors a year, almost 140 million visitors now since it opened on Veterans Day weekend in November 1982. So the wall turned 31 years old last November. Now, as you can imagine, the idea for a Vietnam Veterans Memorial actually came from a Vietnam veteran, and that man's name is Jan Scruggs. Scruggs served in the Army in Vietnam. He was infantry, and unfortunately, he was seriously wounded in battle in May of 1969. Fortunately, he survived, came back to settle here in the Washington area, even went on to get a law degree. But he later wrote that it was as he was working on his college degree is actually when he became interested in the idea of building a memorial right here on the National Mall to honor our Vietnam veterans. Now, imagine what an absolutely crazy idea that had to have been. Some guy in his 20s thinking that he could convince Congress to approve the first memorial on the mall since the Jefferson Memorial opened in 1943. So it's pretty amazing to have some guy so focused on building a memorial here on the National Mall and actually getting it done. But Scruggs was on a mission. He had seen firsthand how this country had treated our veterans when they came home from Vietnam. It's hard to imagine now, but many of our veterans were literally spit on. And the movies of the 1970s, movies like Rambo or Apocalypse Now or The Deer Hunter, tended to portray our veterans in a very negative manner. And Scruggs said he had to do something to heal the nation and to try to bring some honor and respect to our veterans. So he found a couple of very influential senators, Charles Mathias from Maryland, Senator John Warner from Virginia, and those two senators actually got legislation through Congress in less than a year. President Jimmy Carter signed the bill on the 1st of July, 1980, authorizing a Vietnam Veterans Memorial right here on the National Mall. Now, you guys are a little too young to remember the Vietnam War or the 1960s and 70s, but I can tell you, as someone who lived through that this war tore this country apart. It was America's longest war, and it was America's first televised war. And that was a big deal because never before had Americans seen their young men and women in combat, to see all the horror of war in living color on the evening news. But the new electronic media brought it to us firsthand in Vietnam. And the longer the war went on, the more controversial it became. And so Jan Scruggs and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial did not want to build a memorial that would also be controversial. So they did a lot of things to keep controversy out of this design and memorial. First of all, it was decided that whatever was going to be built on these 3 acres of land would not be built with tax money. That way, nobody, regardless of their politics, could ever say that their tax money had gone to use to build this memorial. It was all built with private contributions. Nearly $9 million was raised. Now, they also decided they were not going to hire an architect to design it either. They felt that nobody would ever be happy that it was the right architect or the right design. So they had a contest, and they opened it up to all U.S. citizens 18 years of age or older. It was hoped that would bring the nation back together again as people from all over the country had an opportunity to design the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And then they picked some judges for this contest. They picked 8 judges. Now, you would think that judges for a Vietnam Veterans Memorial would be Vietnam veterans. Not one of them was a Vietnam vet. But that was intentional. That way, nobody could ever say that a Vietnam veteran had influenced the design in any way whatsoever. Now, if you're going to have a contest, you need some rules, right? So there were some rules for this contest, but only 4. Rule number 1 said the memorial could make no political statement. They wanted to keep politics completely out of this. Rule number 2 is the memorial had to fit in with the natural landscaping here on the mall. They didn't want to build another Lincoln Memorial or Washington Monument. They wanted something that would fit in with the landscaping. Rule number 3 is the memorial had to be a place of contemplation. They wanted visitors like you guys to come here to this memorial and remember the terrible cost of war. And rule number 4, and Jan Scruggs really insisted on this, that the memorial had to contain the names of all of the dead and missing so that nobody would ever forget them. That's 4 easy rules, right? So when the contest started, I don't think they had any idea how many entries they were going to get, but they got over 1,400 entries in the national contest. So many entries, they actually had to use a hangar out at Andrews Air Force Base to lay all of the entries out in on the hangar floor. Well, the judges spent nearly a week going through all of these entries one by one, and I find it still pretty amazing that at the end of the week, all 8 judges had unanimously settled on one design. And it's the design that's right behind you, the memorial that many of us now simply call the wall. Well, you've heard me describe how they did so much to try to keep controversy out of this, but you know what they got? Controversy. The critics hated it. When the winning design was published in newspapers around the country, the critics absolutely screamed. Some said it looked like a giant tombstone. Others called it America's version of the Wailing Wall. It's black and below ground level in a city of white marble. As you look around this city, Lincoln, Jefferson, Washington, the Capitol, the White House, the archives, the Supreme Court building, they're all white marble. This is black and underground. One Vietnam vet said it looked like a big ditch on the National Mall. And the criticism didn't stop just with the design. The critics even attacked the person that designed it, the winner of the contest. Because you see, this beautiful memorial had been designed by a 21-year-old college student from Yale, and her name is Maya Lin. The critics screamed even louder, and you know why? Maya was young, female, not a veteran, and of Chinese descent. Now, Maya was born in Athens, Ohio. She had every right to be in the contest, but Maya's parents were from China, and many of our veterans remember that China had been one of the largest backers of communist North Vietnam during the war, and it upset some vets to think that their memorial was being designed by someone of Chinese descent. But although she was only 21 years old, she went on to defend this design at a number of public hearings, and in the end, she convinced the critics that this design should be the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Now, no one should be surprised that Maya Lin was actually majoring in architecture at Yale. In fact, when she saw the poster up on campus advertising a national contest, Maya decided to enter the contest, and she turned her project in as a school project. Well, she had a pretty tough teacher at Yale because she got a B+ on it as a school project. Fortunately, the judges thought that it was A+ work. Maya's class came down here to the National Mall from Yale, and she later wrote that it was here that she actually came up with her idea for the design. Now, Maya later wrote she didn't even know much about this war. She'd been too young through most of it. But she said she knew that the war had torn this country apart. So just for a moment, I'd like you to imagine the land behind you here without the wall there. This was just simply a gently rolling hill. Maya would later write that the first thing that she envisioned was a giant knife cutting a huge gash in America. And one of the reasons I always do the talk from up here is it's easy to visualize that knife cutting into the earth, digging deeper and deeper, and finally pulling back up out of the earth. So the wall itself is a wound or a scar in America. She used black granite as the material. Black, she said, is not symbolic of defeat, but symbolic of earth, since it is a cut into the earth. She used granite for a very specific reason. She knew granite would last hundreds and hundreds of years, but more importantly is the symbolism of granite. Granite acts as the permanent barrier between the living and the dead. We can reach onto that wall and touch their names, but they're never again going to enter our world. Maya also knew something else about black granite, and I also think that that's an extremely important part of this memorial. She knew that when you polish black granite, that the surface of the memorial would actually become a mirror. And so as you guys are down at the wall and looking at it, you will see yourself in the reflections of the names. And she wanted us, the living, to see our reflection in their names so that we would always remember that those guys were just like us. Sons, brothers, fathers, best friends, and boyfriends. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan spoke here, and I remember a line from his speech that day. President Reagan said, "Visitors will come to the wall to find the name of a loved one, and when they finally find the name, they will find it in their own reflection." The reflections off of that wall are so powerful, you can see visitors reflected all the way up here on the plaza. So now remember, one of the contest rules, the memorial had to contain the names, but the rules didn't say how the names needed listed. Maya Lin could have done it any way she wanted, but the way she did it is really the reason she won the contest. Visitors have asked me if the names are listed by state, or by branch of service, or by rank. A very frequently asked question is, why not list them alphabetically? It'd be easier to find a name that way, right? All the Adamses together, and Smiths together, and Johnsons. But there are 667 guys with the last name of Smith on the wall. And Maya Lin said she didn't want the memorial to look like a telephone book. What she did say is that she wanted the memorial to tell the story of a journey through time. And so Maya Lin wrote the story of the journey day by day in the order that they died or went missing. And that is so powerful to me for several reasons. First of all, it turns the memorial into a diary, literally writing the history of the Vietnam War day by day in the very names themselves. Secondly, is that it puts men who fought together and died together, always together on the wall. A squad in Vietnam could have had 8 or 10 guys from 8 or 10 different states, and maybe the only time they ever knew each other is when they were in Vietnam, but if they died together, they're always going to be together on that wall. And also Maya Lin said she wanted our Vietnam veterans to come back to this memorial and to find their own place in the journey. So if I know when a veteran served in Vietnam, I can get them back exactly in front of the panels to be with the guys that they served with. Many of our volunteers are Vietnam vets. I can usually tell when they served in Vietnam by where they stand at the wall. They're back with the guys that they served with. So now you know the names are chronological by day. So the big question is, where do the names start? Now most visitors come in on this western point of the wall. The Lincoln Memorial's up here, all the tour buses stop out here. And it's logical or easy to assume that the names start at this end. But I also hear visitors telling their friends they think the names start up at the other end. The fact is, Maya Lin didn't start the names at either end. Maya Lin chose to start the names in the center of the memorial. And there's a very specific reason for that. That is the most powerful section of the memorial. It's the deepest section, 10.5 feet tall are the panels down in that area. And it's a very quiet place. It blocks out all the city noise and the street noise. So the wall starts with our first 2 men killed, Major Dale Bice and Master Sergeant Chester Ovnand, who died 8 July 1959. And from there it begins to read like a diary. Day by day, panel by panel, 29,000 names out as it works its way out eastward toward the Washington Monument. It recedes into the earth on May 25th, 1968. That's the halfway point in our losses. Then it swings around, it picks back up the same day, 25 May 1968, marches all the way back in another 29,000 names, and it ends with our last 18 men killed on May 15th, 1975. And so why would Maya Lin design the memorial this way? Well, her answer was so simple and so powerful. She said she did it this way so that the first and the last would be together. Her way of symbolically bringing closure to America's longest war. So it starts in the center, symbolically goes full circle. The Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, side by side at the deepest section of the memorial. Maya Lin wrote that she wanted visitors to come in from either side. As they walk down into the valley, the cost of war will get more and more powerful around them, until at the deepest section, where it's a very quiet place, you'll meet the first and the last together. And I always showed visitors how long this war lasted. Some of the guys killed on the last day, on the 15th of May, 1975, were only 18 years old when they died. They were only 2 years old when Dale Bice and Chester Ovnan died in 1959. But they're always going to be together, side by side, bringing closure to this terrible war. Maya Lin said as visitors exit the memorial that symbolically it would release them as they walk back out into the sunlight. She pointed the eastern wall right at the Washington Monument. She pointed the western wall right at the Lincoln Memorial. She said to do this, it would cradle the memorial between two of our greatest presidents and give the Vietnam Veterans Memorial an historical place here on the National Mall. Now, on this memorial, there are no references to rank, race, religion, gender, or branch of service. They all wore the uniform of the United States, and they all paid the same price. Black, white, Jew, Christian, male, female, a private or a general, it doesn't matter. On this wall, everybody is equal. There are some symbols that are used by the names, though, and every name has a symbol by it. Most names have a diamond by their name, and that means they've been declared dead. But when the wall was built, there were 1,256 men listed on the wall who were missing in action. So alongside of their name is a plus symbol, an artistic symbol of hope. Over the years, we've normalized relations with Vietnam. They've allowed our search teams back in, and we have found and identified the remains of more than 500 missing in action. And when that occurs, the engravers come back here to the wall in May, and they change the pluses into diamonds. They've now changed 520, including 13 this May, dropping the total of missing in action now down to 736. There's another symbol that was designed for the wall but never used, and that's that if we should ever find a missing in action who's still alive, we would put a circle around his plus, a symbol of life. Unfortunately, we've never found a missing in action still alive. Visitors also often ask us about the many items that have been left here at the wall. If you visited the grave of a loved one, you may leave flowers or a teddy bear in remembrance of them. Well, so too have visitors been leaving items here at the wall since 1982. And if it's not flowers or perishable food, we keep everything. Almost 150,000 items now in the warehouse. I've seen everything imaginable left at this memorial. Combat boots, helmets, flak jackets, dog tags, medals, POW bracelets, C rations, P38 can openers, Zippo lighters, a wedding dress, caps and gowns at graduation time, Easter baskets, fishing rods, baseballs, basketballs, footballs, decks of cards, packs of cigarettes, bottles of beer, and bottles of Jack Daniels. Anything that may remind somebody of a loved one or somebody that they had served with in Vietnam. A very powerful moment to me was several summers ago, August of 2008. On a Saturday morning, we came down to the wall and we found a cigar box. Well, when we opened it up, inside of the cigar box were nearly 24 love letters that had been written from a soldier in Vietnam to his girlfriend back here in the States. He was killed in August of 1968, so his name is on this western side of the wall. And that woman had kept his love letters all of these years, and on the 40th anniversary of his death, she brought his love letters back to him and placed them in front of his name on the wall. On Memorial Day 1995, we came down to this wall and found a Harley Davidson. Well, it turns out the Harley had been built by a motorcycle club from Wisconsin. Many of the guys in the club were Vietnam vets. They built it all with donated labor from donated parts, and no member of the club had ever been allowed to sit on the bike. When they interviewed the president of this club and they asked him, why would you leave a Harley at the wall? He just said, well, our club goes out for a ride almost every weekend, and if a brother from the wall wanted to come with us, we wanted him to have a bike. The wall turned 30 years old last November, and it's hard now to imagine how this beautiful memorial could have been so controversial. But believe me, the critics screamed, and they screamed pretty loudly. and they were actually able to force a compromise. The compromise was a decision to add this statue, the three servicemen statue. It was added Veterans Day 1984, done by a great local sculptor named Frederick Hart. Hart depicts an African American, Caucasian, and a Hispanic soldier, representing over 95% of the U.S. servicemen who were in Vietnam. He shows no reference to branch of service or rank because he wanted any of our veterans to be able to identify with them. And Hart's work here is so great that he even shows one of the soldiers with one of his dog tags laced into one of his boots. It was not uncommon for a soldier to separate your two dog tags, to keep one around your neck and lace the other dog tag into one of your boots. And Hart captures that. But to me, what's so powerful about this three servicemen statue is actually where it's at. Because to many visitors, it looks like these guys have just come back from patrol, exhausted in the heat and humidity of Vietnam. And as they step out of the tree line, they stop in shock, suddenly confronted not by the enemy, but by a black granite wall with the names of more than 58,000 they had served with. Others think maybe they've stopped up here not wanting to get any closer because they're afraid they'll find their own name is written on the wall. An interesting side note, the man who posed as a model for the center soldier, the Caucasian soldier, died just several weeks ago. He lived up near Sugarloaf Mountain in Maryland, and unfortunately he and Frederick Hart have both passed away. So this was added in 1984, but remember we had almost 10,000 women serve in the U.S. military in Vietnam, and we honor their sacrifice here as well. About 100 yards down this walkway is the Women's Memorial, dedicated Veterans Day of 1993. Done by another great sculptor named Glenna Goodacre, Glenna depicts three uniformed American women aiding a wounded U.S. soldier as they wait for the rescue or dust-off helicopter to come in. And even though the soldier in the statue appears to have suffered a terrible chest wound, Glenna would later write that what kept her so focused on completing that sculpture was the belief that the soldier does not die, but is saved by those three women. We're often asked if there are any women on the wall. Well, the military's changed a lot in 40 years. We've lost about 150 women serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, but in Vietnam they were mostly behind the lines in support roles. About 85% of the women who served were nurses. There are 8 women on the wall, all 8 of them nurses, 7 Army, 1 Air Force. They're listed right along with the men in the order that they gave their lives. But around the Women's Memorial are planted 8 yellowwood trees in honor of the 8 women on the wall. And finally, several years ago, we recognized with a small plaque over here in the plaza the hundreds and thousands of men and women who have died as a result of their service in Vietnam, whose names will never be eligible to be on the wall. They may have died from post-traumatic stress disorder, cancer from exposure to some of the defoliants like Agent Orange that were used in Vietnam. We call this the In Memory plaque to honor all of those who died as a result of their service, whose names will not be on the wall. Guys, I'd like to remind you as you make your way around our nation's capital today, looking at all the monuments and memorials, that this country and its veterans paid an enormous price in the 20th century, not just for our own freedom as Americans, but for the freedom of others around the world. We don't have a national World War I memorial here in Washington, but we lost over 116,000 in that war that was supposed to end all wars. We finally got our World War II memorial. It's at the far end of the reflecting pool, and in it is a field of gold stars. Each star represents 100 U.S. dead or missing. There are 4,048 stars in honor of nearly 405,000 we lost. The inscription in the World War II memorial simply says, "Here we mark the price of freedom." On the other side of the reflecting pool is the Korean memorial, where we honor another 36,000 Americans who gave their lives to keep the people of South Korea free. There the inscription is only 4 words. It says, "Freedom is not free." And here at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the price of freedom is written on the wall in the names of 58,286 of my heroes. And I would ask that you not forget that this country has now lost more than 6,650 of our finest young men serving in Iraq, young men and women serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. Guys, we've got a beautiful weekend here for you in Washington, and as you make your way around visiting the sites, I just have one favor to ask of you. And that's that if you should happen to see a veteran, maybe one in your family or one traveling with you in your group, maybe you guys could take just a moment to go up to him or her and just say thanks for helping to keep this wonderful country of ours the land of the free. On behalf of the National Park Service and all the volunteers who work here at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, thanks for remembering, and thanks for coming to see us today at the wall.